The record was stamped with a date 73 years before anyone in the Interstellar Compact thought to check it. Not a battle log, not a diplomatic transcript, an inventory form, the kind of bureaucratic artifact that accumulates in the lower archives of any civilization old enough to generate paperwork nobody reads. This particular form had been filed by a junior logistics officer aboard the Vethkai relief vessel Unbroken Patience, and it described, in exhaustive detail, the contents of 47 cargo containers offloaded onto a dying planet in the Orion Fringe. Medical supplies, atmospheric stabilizers, protein synthesis units, standard disaster relief, routine charity. The civilization receiving it had no faster-than-light travel, no seat at any galactic council, no name in any compact registry except a taxonomic designation, species 7291C, atmospheric oxygen breathers, pre-integration marginal survival probability. Their planet was called in their own language Earth. What nobody noted on that inventory form, what nobody thought to note, because why would they, was a single line at the bottom of Container 31. Condition of recipients upon delivery, grateful. Advocate Prime Sareth Vall had reviewed 312 first contact assessments in her career. She had never once felt the need to read a file twice. She read the Earth file 4 times. The document in front of her was not a diplomatic summary or a cultural index. It was a deposition, given voluntarily, under no legal compulsion, by Commander Haran Dast of the Compact Survey Division, retired. He had requested the meeting himself. He had taken a transport from the Outer Rim specifically to sit in her office, and when he lowered himself into the chair across from her desk, she noticed he moved like someone who had recently been in pain and had simply decided to stop acknowledging it. "You understand," she said, "that what you've described in this document contradicts 3 separate compact assessments of Earth's military capacity." "Yes." "And the incident at Threshold Station." "Yes." "And your own report from 6 years ago." Dast was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone choosing careful words, the quiet of someone who had already chosen them and was deciding whether they still believed them. "My report from 6 years ago," he said, "was written by someone who didn't understand what he had seen." Sareth Vall set down the document. She looked at him, at the way his hands rested on his knees, perfectly still, with the deliberate stillness of someone who has trained themselves not to betray anything. "Then explain it to me now," she said. "From the beginning." The beginning, for Haran Dast, was a medical bay, not a grand one, not the kind with gleaming equipment and competent staff moving in calm, professional arcs. This was the medical bay of the CSF Meridian, a compact survey frigate that had been running the Orion Fringe for 4 years without a refit, and it smelled of recycled air and chemical antiseptic, and something underneath both that Dast, even now, could not identify. He had been 29 years old and newly posted as a Xenorelations liaison, which was a title that meant he spoke 6 languages and was expected to be useful at cocktail parties when the diplomats arrived. No diplomats ever arrived on the Meridian. What arrived instead, 11 days into his posting, was a distress signal from Earth. Not unusual, he told Sareth Vall. Earth had been flagged for observation after the Vethkai relief mission. Standard practice, any pre-integration species that receives compact assistance gets a monitoring tag, mostly to track whether the aid was effective. And was it? The atmospheric stabilizers worked. The protein synthesis units worked. The planet's population had recovered from approximately 60% to what their own census called full restoration. He paused. The distress signal wasn't about their planet. Sareth Vall waited. "It was about ours," he said. "The signal had come from a human vessel. That was the first impossible thing. Earth had no interstellar vessels. The Compact's own assessment had placed them roughly 2 centuries from viable faster-than-light development, assuming steady linear progress, which was the kind of assumption that felt safe until it wasn't. But the signal was unambiguous. The origin point was terrestrial. The vessel was approximately 200 meters long, built from materials that the Meridian spectrographic analysis described. in a report Dast still remembered word for word as improvised but structurally coherent. Improvised. A 200-meter starship built by a species that wasn't supposed to have starships, described by the most advanced survey sensors in the compact as improvised. How? Sarath Val asked. We asked them that eventually. Dast allowed something that wasn't quite a smile to cross his face. The answer was the first thing that should have warned us. The human vessel, they called it the Constance, which turned out to be a name with no tactical significance whatsoever, simply the name of someone's grandmother, had been built using the schematics reverse-engineered from the Vethkai cargo containers. Not the containers' contents, the containers themselves. The structural geometry, the alloy composition, the atmospheric sealing mechanisms. A Vethkai logistics officer had sent charity, and humans had spent 17 years studying the packaging. They reverse-engineered faster than light travel, Sarath Val said slowly, from a shipping container. From 47 shipping containers, Dast said, and they still got some of it wrong. The Constance couldn't make a second jump without a 40-hour cooldown. Their navigation relied on a method one of their engineers described to me as, he reached into his memory, creative triangulation. The ship had been designed and built by a committee of roughly 400 people across 11 different nations over the course of 9 years. Most of them had never met. He paused. It flew. The second impossible thing was why they had come. Sarath Val found the answer on page 37 of Dast's deposition, and she read it 3 times before she trusted her own comprehension. The Constance had not come to request compact membership, had not come to report a threat or establish trade, had not come, in any framework Sarath Val's career had prepared her for any reason that should have required a ship at all. They had come because, in the 17 years since the Vethkai relief mission, they had been listening to compact communications, passively, with equipment built from salvaged weather satellites and radio telescope arrays, and they had detected something. A distress signal. Not from Earth. From a compact colony vessel, the Karath Sun, lost 7 years ago with all 4,000 inhabitants in the debris field now designated Survey Corridor 9. The compact had declared the Karath Sun lost after a 2-week search. The mathematics of the debris field and the radiation levels had made continued search operationally indefensible. The humans had found a different set of mathematics. They intercepted our search and rescue communication logs, Dast said. They ran their own probability models. They determined that the official search pattern had missed a 17-degree arc of the debris field because of an assumption built into our search algorithm, an assumption about the minimum viable life support duration for the species aboard. He stopped. Let the silence carry weight. What was the assumption? Sarath Val asked, though she suspected already that she would not like the answer. That no survivor could remain psychologically functional after 14 days in an emergency capsule without external communication. He looked at her steadily. The humans disagreed with that assumption. On what basis? On the basis, Dast said, that they had done it themselves, multiple times, as a documented feature of their survival history. The Meridian reached Survey Corridor 9 11 days after intercepting the Constance. They arrived to find the human ship already there, 3 days ahead of them, deep in the 17-degree arc the compact search had abandoned. The Constance was moving slowly, methodically, without the sophisticated scanning arrays a compact vessel would use, instead dragging what appeared to be a physically improvised sensor net, built from cargo netting and repurposed emergency beacons. Dast remembered standing at the communications console when the first contact signal came in from the Constance. The voice on the other end was calm, slightly hoarse as though the speaker hadn't slept. The universal compact translator took 3 attempts to calibrate to the accent. Meridian, this is Constance, we've got something. Bearing 274, declination -12. Faint, but it's there. You're going to want to move fast. Our readings suggest compromised hull integrity on whatever it is. Dast had looked at his commanding officer, Fleet Second Varan, who had looked back at him with an expression he had never seen on a Vethkai face before. "Are they?" Varen said quietly, giving us search coordinates. "I believe so, sir. For a rescue operation in compact space." "Yes, sir." "That we abandoned." Dast said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. "Take us to bearing 274, Varen said. "They found 17 survivors." Humans had identified the capsule using a sensor net made of cargo netting and old emergency beacons, had broadcast the coordinates to a compact ship that had superior technology by every measurable standard, and had quietly waited while the professionals did the extraction. The lead human on the communication channel, a woman named Tors, had asked only one question once the survivors were confirmed aboard the Meridian. "Are they going to be okay?" Not, "What do we get for this?" Not, "We request formal recognition." Not, "Open a diplomatic channel." Just, "Are they going to be okay?" Varen had answered her and then cut the channel and stood very still at the center of the bridge for approximately 30 seconds. "Sir," Dast had ventured. "I am calculating," Varen said, "how many of our assumptions about this species need to be revised." This was where Sareth Vol put down the document again, not from disinterest, from the opposite. "The rescue," she said. "That was the event you reported 6 years ago." "That was the event I failed to correctly report 6 years ago," Dast said. "Your report described it as an opportunistic gesture, a primitive species attempting to leverage a lucky discovery for political favor." "Yes. And now you're telling me it wasn't." "I'm telling you," Dast said, "that at the time, I genuinely believed that was what it was. I had a framework for understanding what pre-integration species do when they encounter the compact, and I put what I saw into that framework, and the framework told me it was opportunism." He looked at his hands. "I was wrong in a way that took me 6 more years to understand, and what I understand now is that was the introduction. What came after is what I need to tell you about." Sareth Vol felt something she rarely felt in depositions. She felt the floor shift. Not literally, but something in the structure of what she understood about the universe, about the compact's place in it, about the orderly hierarchy of civilizations from primitive to integrated to advanced, made a small, quiet, tectonic adjustment. Because she had read the file. She knew the dates. She knew that between the rescue at Survey Corridor 9 and the morning Dast had walked into her office, exactly 6 years had passed. And in those 6 years, according to the compact's own assessments, Earth had been reclassified from pre-integration to integration pending, had submitted a formal request for observer status, had been politely told to wait while the compact processed approximately 400 other pending applications, and had, apparently, done something with that waiting period that had caused a retired survey commander to travel across the outer rim specifically to file a deposition he clearly found difficult to make himself say aloud. "What did they do?" she asked. Dast looked up. "You know about the succession crisis," he said. It was not a question. She knew about the succession crisis. Everyone in the compact knew about the succession crisis. 18 months ago, 3 of the 7 compact founding species had simultaneously contested the composition of the Governance Council, and the resulting procedural deadlock had, for 11 weeks, effectively paralyzed the compact's ability to respond to anything that wasn't unanimously classified as an emergency. Trade routes had stalled. 3 border disputes had escalated. 2 species on the integration track had received no response to formal communications for so long that they had quietly begun looking for alternative political arrangements. "I know about it," she said. "Do you know what happened at Karath Threshold during the crisis?" She paused. Karath Threshold was a transit hub. One of the compact's 14 major chokepoints for interstellar commerce, a gravitational lens that allowed faster-than-light vessels to navigate a particularly dense cluster region efficiently. Losing access to it would have been catastrophic for approximately 1,100 inhabited systems. During the crisis, when Compact Enforcement Authority was paralyzed, a consortium of fringe operators, she had seen the diplomatic language used, which was careful not to say pirates, had moved to occupy the threshold. The compact had been unable to respond. Every enforcement action required unanimous council approval. Unanimous approval required a functioning council. A functioning council required resolving the succession dispute. The threshold had sat exposed for 22 days. "I know about the threshold," Sarath Val said. "The consortium withdrew. The official assessment was that they experienced internal disagreements and abandoned the occupation voluntarily." Dast said nothing. She looked at him. He said nothing. "That's not what happened," she said. "The Constance," he said, "was not the only human ship by that point. It emerged slowly, the way large things usually do, not in a single revelation, but in pieces that accumulated weight until the combined mass was no longer ignorable. Earth, in the 4 years between the rescue at Survey Corridor 9 and the succession crisis, had built 11 ships, not because anyone had asked them to, not because the compact had offered any framework for pre-integration species to develop military capacity. They had built 11 ships because they had decided, in whatever collective and chaotic and multinational way humans decided anything, that the galaxy was a dangerous place, and they had been lucky once, and they were not interested in trusting exclusively to luck. The ships were not elegant. The compact's engineering core, when they eventually got access to the schematics, produced an assessment that used the phrase structurally ambitious approximately 14 times, which was compact diplomatic language, for we cannot explain why this is still in one piece. 3 of the 11 ships required their crews to wear supplemental oxygen during faster-than-light transit because the cabin pressure management systems were not quite right. The navigation on 2 of them was still dependent on what the humans called creative triangulation. They flew, and when the consortium moved on Karath threshold, the humans had been monitoring compact communications for long enough to know what it meant. "They didn't ask permission," Dast said. "They didn't request authorization from the Council. They didn't fight."